Hey guys, welcome to Real Life School Podcast, where we talk about all the things that school doesn't, and you get to hear it from people that have been there and done it. So for today's episode, I bring on a buddy of mine, Clay Olson, who is a dad, and we're going to be talking about raising kids with a solid cornerstone featuring just a couple of dads. So today, Clay called me and I basically had to say, hey, are you free for a little bit while? You want to do a podcast? He goes, yeah. I said, great. I'll see you in a little bit. And he's like, okay, see ya. So first time podcast. There's really nothing to it, man. We're just sitting here talking. But for today and for the viewers, I know a lot of you are around the same age group as us, 30s and 40s. Some are older than others. Just kidding. But we want to share with you kind of lessons learned, kind of the stories on how we're raising our kids. Not that we have it all figured out. We don't. We don't have it all figured out. And when we have kids, like nobody hands you a book and says, here's your checklist to raising godly children, the right way. But for us, I felt like we needed to discuss how we live our lives with our kids, how you live your lives with your kids. And then the viewers can be like, oh, wow, this was not planned at all. And you can see some similarities on how people are raising their children. So I want to open up with, how old were you when you met your wife? And then how old were you guys when you guys had your first child?
Yeah, so Sarah and I met pretty late in life. I was 33. She was just before my 33rd birthday, and she was 28, about to turn 29. So we're a bit older,
Okay.
Definitely older than, when I was a teenager thinking about being a dad, what age I would like to have kids, all of that. Probably due to mostly my experiences in adolescence, selfishness.
Sure.
God was keeping me from hurting one of his daughters. And
Yeah.
so until it was appropriate time, but because of our age when we met, we did decide to have kids pretty quickly. And it was actually less than 2 months after our honeymoon that Sarah told me that she was pregnant. So,
Oh,
yeah,
man.
so it was
Nice.
almost a honeymoon baby. Yeah, and with that, we reminisce about how we wished possibly we could have had more time together prior to having children. So
There's a lot of people that feel that way. Like, hey, I
Yeah.
want to get to know my spouse before we
Sure.
throw in another human being. Hannah had the same feeling. We met and then got married a year to the day, and then a couple of deployments a few years later, then I had to talk her into having kids.
Yeah, all right.
So we had a little bit of time, but you guys
Sure.
jumped right into it.
Yeah, we were both ready. Sarah had come out of a pretty long relationship prior to us meeting together, and she knew what she wanted.
Yeah.
I had been raised by, awesome parents. I got to see what a good godly marriage looks like.
Yeah.
Of course, none of them are perfect,
Yeah, I get
ours
it.
included. And it was just something that I had always wanted, and it was all in God's timing. So
Yeah, for sure. So, your first couple of years when you guys were raising your kids, did you guys have a foundation? Like, did you guys know the avenue and the road that you wanted your kids to grow up? Like, was church a priority? Was raising them a certain way a priority? And what did that look like?
Yeah. So my background, I was raised in the Christian faith.
Okay.
My parents, when we were young, took us through mostly Baptist churches. And so I got a good idea of what it, definitely what the 10 Commandments were,
Sure.
how we shouldn't live.
Yeah.
Maybe to a point of over protection from the culture. And so when she and I met, like, I had a good idea of how I wanted to raise our kids.
Yeah.
There was on her side, a desire to, as she was walking with the Lord, like, follow in that, and wanted to find somebody. So, we actually met at church through
Cool,
a
man.
tertiary friend who introduced us together. And we both knew, like, the difficulties in life of trying to do it your own way and figure it out, rather than having someone who's gone before you, who kind of obviously is the author of life, the engineer, if you will, that
Yeah.
tells us how we should live, knows it best.
Yeah.
And so, we had thoughts about what we wanted to do. I think that there's, a good portion of the time that we spent talking about how we would raise our kids. So we dated for about 10 months before I proposed. And during the engagement, we did marriage prep. We
Yes.
talked about, that we read books together about raising kids. And
The love languages. Did you guys
yeah,
read that?
love languages,
Yeah, there you go.
various other books that we did together. And we just had, frankly, just like real honest conversations
Yeah.
about what that looks like. We knew that regular church attendance was a part of it.
Yep.
But that wasn't just enough to raise kids, godly kids who are going to go against the culture, is not something that happens by accident.
No. And, it's very similar to your situation. Hannah was raised, went to school in the church that she attended and her family attended. So we moved to DC and she goes, we're going to have a child and I want to make sure that my kids are planted and grow up with a church, because when they go and they deviate and they, step off the right path, they will come back because they had the foundation.
Right.
So I didn't necessarily have the same sort of background or foundation, but I knew when my wife said, this is how I was raised, and I love her for who she is today because of that foundation, because of that background.
Mm-hmm.
And it was super critical, and I didn't bat an eye. And in fact, I was like, priority number one, find a church, and we did.
Yeah.
And it was life-changing. So,
Yeah.
so you guys had that discussion, premarital counseling. So you guys are on the same page. So when you guys make this commitment, you guys are good to go.
Yeah.
Church attendance regularly.
Yep. We, there's a lot that fights against, and I'm talking about like spiritual warfare, that fights
Yeah.
against us. I don't know why it comes up a lot of times on Sunday mornings. So it's like, you don't really want to go. And I think that that's, something that you have to be expecting and be ready for.
Oh, yeah.
And then
You mean
just
you guys fight
push through it.
before Sunday morning attendance?
No.
Let me tell you,
Not us together,
it's
not the kids.
ever.
Like, we're not screaming at each other
It's
and
so
then
easy.
go to church and be happy. Well,
Wow.
we could talk about real stuff at church with people who actually care about us
That's
and love
right.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah, didn't have a good morning this morning, but we're here.
no.
so we
In
need
fact,
it.
we were just fighting in the parking lot. Hannah's still in the car, et cetera, et cetera. We've never been there before.
It happens,
No.
unfortunately.
It's funny you bring that up, man. I never actually recognized that there are some mornings before church that are very difficult for the family. And we wonder why that is, right? You talked about spiritual warfare, and that'll be another podcast for another time. But that's very real.
Yeah, we have an enemy that doesn't want us to
Constantly.
be focused on building God's kingdom, of dying to ourselves
Yep.
and living a life that may be more difficult than what we want to do in the short term, but it's what's best.
Yeah.
And so I think where some of that, the routines, the habits that we put in our life that become more like our character traits. Sarah and I had developed those in ourselves.
That's
and
awesome.
We want to do that with our children. And so, providing a stable home where there are routines in place, like going to church, like having
Praying before breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If
prayer
you can,
time,
right?
Individual, even like dates, if you will. Like
Yeah.
I go on dates with my 7-year-old daughter. I spend time with my son one-on-one.
Yeah.
They spend enough time with us to see how, and what's most important for them, I think, is how Sarah and I treat each other.
Yo,
They're
yeah.
going to learn about relationships. They're going to learn about very practical ways in which our days go about, how we treat each other.
100%.
When one of us is having a bad day, and hopefully it's not both of us at the same time
Yep.
having a bad day, that we're able to help regulate each other's emotions,
Yeah.
to encourage us,
Yeah.
to pray, to, again, develop those healthy patterns of habits that over time develop our children's characters.
It's funny you bring that up, habits and patterns. So when we pray at dinner, typically we're all together for dinner. My son, he's not even 2 years old yet, will bow his head and then close his eyes. And then halfway through the prayer, I'm watching him, right? As parents, you want to watch the behaviors. And I'll see him like creak an eye open at me to see, like, he doesn't know if the prayer has ended yet.
Sure.
And we're just talking. So,
Yeah.
But when dad says amen, he will say amen.
Yeah.
Right. And before bed, I'll say, hey, do you want to say your prayers? And he goes, uh-huh.
Yeah.
And he closes his eyes and he's ready to pray.
So good.
So I bring this up, and you brought it up, and here's a point to it, is that everything that our kids do is a learned trait. So you brought up, if we're having a bad day, how you work through that conflict, hopefully not bad day at the same time, but like your kids are going to have bad days. Your spouse and their spouses and them are going to have bad days. And everything that you do as a parent is teaching them how they will grow up on a foundational level. Like we don't just wake up one day and know how to tie our shoes.
Right.
It's over constant days of tying your shoes over and over and over again to learning how to tie your shoe. The same thing was raising your children in a Christian faith by praying, by working through the conflict, because it's inevitable. I love that you brought that up, man.
Yeah. And I think the reason why a good marriage happens is because you've got two people who they love each other more than they love themselves. Like they consider the other more important than themselves.
Yeah.
They've had a walk with the Lord of, dying to oneself. And so when the days are hard, that we remember the foundation is love, and that we are to, I tell my kids, how do you explain things to children that they can understand? And so our definition of love is just you before me.
Oh, I
Four
love that.
simple words to remind ourselves, when I say that I love somebody, am I putting them before myself?
You before me. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I've found that, the the things like you were talking about, the prayers, the even demonstrating, like for kids, like when we blow it, to ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, I'm
to
sorry.
Admit when we've blown it.
Yep.
They pick up on that and they start to see it. And some of those things, like the prayer time before bed, the prayer time at meals, like it's just cool to see as they grow. My son hasn't necessarily, he's asked maybe a couple times, like, I pray, and there's not a whole lot. He's a little, he's still not quite fully there, but like Quinn has been able to encourage us to pray. Like if
Really?
we started eating, like, hey, we need to pray. Oh,
we forgot to pray.
Great, like, and some of that's like, are they going to notice?
Yeah.
We
That's
give
how
them
you're
those
doing it.
opportunities. Yeah. And it's just, it's cool to see not only them. I saw this thing where it's like, it's the hardest part that I realize as a parent is having to discipline the me out of my child.
Oh, man. Yeah, there's a lot of Hannah in my kids that I have to discipline.
I'm sure she's
Sorry.
the problem, dude. Yeah.
Sorry,
and
Hannah.
and it's like, it is encouraging and lovely to see when they not only pick up the negative, but also the positive.
Yeah,
and,
man.
And to see like that hopefully is going to be the trajectory of their life.
Yeah.
I think for me, one of the most precious things after we're done praying together, because it's always, Dad, you pray. And then I'm leaving. I'm like, now it's your turn to talk to God on your own.
Yeah.
Like you spend your time with him, whatever that looks like.
I love it.
Tell him how much you love him.
Yeah.
And I don't get to hear those. That's between her and God. It's
Okay.
between him and God. Like,
Yeah.
Makes me wonder, what does she say? Does she? I don't know. Like I've never necessarily put my ear to the door.
That's a
I might
good
have to try to do
technique.
that. Yeah.
So and then maybe, nobody's got it right. I always ask Lily, I'm like, hey, you're going to pray tonight. What do you want to pray for? And of course it's all things, right? Because it's a juvenile mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for my thwim food. Thank you for my mom. Thank you for my dad. Thank you for my brother, Aith and Avi, her cousin. So like they haven't been able to develop the deep praise, the deep thankfulness, or the ability to ask for something. He knows what we need. Mm-hmm. He knows and has it all figured out, but yet there's still a humility aspect, a human aspect for us to bring it to that level. And I guess I should be a little bit better about that with my kids in terms of how to pray. I mean, most people, we haven't learned how to pray. I mean, the Bible says it, right? Jesus goes, people don't know how to pray, and the Lord's Prayer, right? But we can all get better at that, right?
Yeah. The idea of a child talking to their father is the familiarity with that, the respect with that, the honor with that, even the joyful, playful attitude, maybe potentially the anger or being upset or a misunderstanding or confusion that occurs in their life. I think those are great opportunities for us to demonstrate to them how we should pray, like with us talking to our dad, and then they hear us talking and listening and following.
Yeah.
I think unfortunately, one of the things that I like to do in our prayer time together would be to spend some time listening. Like, what is God telling you?
Yeah.
We've experienced these things today. We've been grateful for these things. We tell him about the difficulties. We admit where we were wrong and that we did our own way without considering him. And, I'm pretty dumb. So like it goes wrong if I do my own thing pretty regularly. I've, in wisdom, like learned his way is better. And that comes from a lot of failure. So it's like getting to that point, and my hope, my goal for them would be to realize that he knows better.
Always.
And that it's for our good, and that it's not always easy. I mean, just life's not easy, man.
No, man.
You want to do it well. You can't be selfish as a husband. You can't be selfish as a father. Like to have good family, it's not possible.
Having a family is the most selfless thing you can do. Before getting married, before having children, right? We thought we weren't selfish, right? And then you get married, and then you get a wake-up call like, okay, I was selfish. Now I have to think about her way more than I think about me, even in terms of discussions, food, time, respect, et cetera, et cetera. Then you add a human, a child, that they know nothing. Literally, they know nothing, right? And without you, they could be hot or cold. Without you, they could be hungry. Without you, they could not have the safety and security. So I have a bunch of single friends that have failed to launch. Sorry if you're watching that. I'll excuse the names, friends.
I was 33 if you didn't catch that at the beginning. So
yeah. But they're all about their time, their career, their money, their progress. And I'm thinking, there is nothing greater for me about this life than being a father and trying to make this place better than was given to me through my children. I know there's some people that would argue about that, but like every day for us as an adult, or anybody really, it's a borrowed day. You don't know if tomorrow will come, but all these lessons, these foundations, these beautiful ways that we are raising our kids is so when we're stripped away one day, when they fade from that, the gate is small and the road is narrow, they will come back. I know I did. I mean, there was a time where I deviated far off course, but I came back because I had the solid foundation. So I want to ask you another question here. What was it and why was it that you chose to live this life the way you do with a godly foundation with your wife and your kids? What was it?
I mentioned growing up in the church, and I had a good example in my folks. For me, ultimately, it was the failure of living my life how I wanted and seeing the hypocrisy between what I believed and what I actually did and what I thought I believed. And it's just, it doesn't work. Like, it may work for a time, but for an eternity, there has to be a new way of thinking. The the old selfish me, if I didn't give that up, like I said, God was probably not interested in giving me somebody who needed me to be that for them
Yeah.
until I was ready. And so, I really think it was a learning experience of failure.
Yeah, you said that.
I'm like, okay, I don't know how to do this. I know I want to do it. Like I had said,
How
for
did you
so
fail
long.
though? I want to pull on that. What do you mean failure? You said it twice. I picked up on it the first time. You lived your life one way and you felt like you had failed, and then you said it again. What do you mean?
I mean, it was just
Were you empty? Were you steerless? Were you like what do you mean?
It was selfish pursuits, and I think ultimately my pride was my downfall. Like I didn't want other people to tell me how to live. I didn't want,
That's hard.
to do in a lot of ways the societal. Like I could just see, and there's certain things that we just see in this world. Like we go down this path, it doesn't work. Well, okay, we need to readjust, right?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that, even growing up in the church, wanting to follow, having, long stint of a prodigal season, if you will, just
Sure.
living my own selfishness. It didn't line up with what I really wanted. Like I wanted to have a family, but who was going to be somebody who wanted me if I only ever cared for myself?
Yeah.
And why would they want to have children with me if they knew like Clay was number one versus
Right.
if I was, and it takes practice, unfortunately. I think the culture in which we live in is promoting individualism, selfishness.
Yeah.
The period of adolescence between, 16 to 26, 30, like I think it's
12 to
typical
30 for me.
Yeah, why we have families starting so much later, and I was not an exception. Like
Yeah.
I did that even though was raised up, and to your point, the foundations that I was raised on, and then I saw the drift away from that
Yeah.
and how it did lead to my ruin. I mean, where I was called a hypocrite, where I was participating in things that I knew weren't good for me, but I
Sure.
had no idea how to break out of them.
Yep. Habits.
The habits that I developed, the character traits that I'm like, this is not something that a godly woman would
No.
want in a husband. So I'm like, how do I
They'll walk. They'll run from that.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, it makes sense. And I think ultimately it was just the failure of not listening to God
Yeah.
in doing what he wanted me to do, because
Yeah.
it's always for our good. And like I said at the a little bit ago, like the difficult things in life that are good for us, like it's hard to want to do them. It's always, the Bible says like sin is attractive for a time. Like it's easy to get into, I think about like working out, right? I'm not the most fit person here, right? I got the
neither.
dad bod going on. The feeling of accomplishment after the fact, that's like what you got to hold on to, because like, dude,
Yeah.
working out sucks.
Going through the
I
storm
don't
is-
like
is
it.
scary.
Like,
It's miserable.
hard.
Yeah.
Why can't we just,
Yeah.
be fit? I
Yeah.
don't know. It's just, and that's, it's a perishable skill, I guess, if you will.
You drove a point home. You were raised in the church, so you had a foundation. I want to make a quick plug. I've met many that were raised one way, and I mean, Wednesdays church, Sunday morning church, Sunday evening church, and as they got older, they totally deviated from it, and they want nothing to do with it. And I've come to the determination, and I want to get your feedback on it real quick. I've come to the determination that something happened to them as a child underneath the responsibility of a religious background, whether it's Catholic or whatever. Something happened to them as a kid, and as an adult, they want no part in it. And they were raised very strict, and I'm starting to see a pattern of that there are people that were, for Catholic, I'm sorry, but I've had many friends that were raised strict Catholic. And then all of a sudden, as an adult, I'm like, hey, you want to come check out our church? Absolutely not. No way. And it's this hard no. And it's because I found out that something happened as a kid that broke the trust and confidence with that organization and that church. But I had to make a plug because I was just thinking about it. You were raised, in a Christian background. I haven't heard anything ever once. Forgive me for saying this, or don't forgive me. I've never heard once somebody that was raised Christian, years later deviated and then wanted to be invited to church and had a staunch no. I've never met one. But with Catholics, strict Catholics, 100% of the time they came from a Catholic background. And that's just my plug, my observation. And I have 20 plus people that have had that reaction. And I'm like talking with friends and family and my wife. I'm like, something definitely happened there, period.
I think for me, what I've witnessed and what turns me off the most when somebody's trying to propose a truth claim, that if they don't exemplify it, the hypocrisy is real, and that's what turns me off. I could be wrong. I think the difference between having a real relationship with Jesus, following a live, living person who's given us his spirit to know when we do wrong, but not, like, you can still be convicted of something that you've done wrong, but never admit it. Like, your kids pick up on that. Like, they know.
Yeah.
They see you're not perfect.
Yeah.
But if you try to put on airs that you are, that this is the right way of living, you know, that maybe there's things that you can do that are unforgivable. I think in some cultures, like ours is guilt and, law and shame, all those kinds of things that come across as, a way we ought to live, but then there's no way of actually doing it. Like, nobody does it perfectly.
Yeah.
And
right.
so to say that there is some sort of like a standard of perfection that you can achieve is lying and
not going to work.
And you can see it with today's culture. You see kids who are starting to see the way things are going and they go, it's unlivable.
Yeah.
In this area you do this, but then over here you do that.
Right.
Where does that
That's why they're confused.
Inconsistency come from, and what is the truth? I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. And unfortunately, in religious circles, it's do as I say, not as I do.
Oh yeah.
And
some of them.
And that's where walking with Jesus, it wasn't just do what I say, it was also and watch what I do, because those two are going to be the same.
Oh yeah.
It's going to be, there's no greater love than a man lay down his life for his friends. Well, that's your wife, that's your kids, that's your community, that's, and he proved it by going to the cross.
That's right.
So I think that's where probably the disconnect lies. And for my children, my hope, and I got this from, I think probably from Living Waters podcast.
Okay.
Emil Zwain said, do my kids know that I'm the biggest sinner in the house? And my hope is yes, because I want them to see that, just like Paul said, if there's hope for me, that Jesus, in how wretched that I am, that they too, they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're learning from us. They have a choice. They have their own will, their own psyche to do whatever it is they want to do.
I like that.
And to recognize that we can be misled, that our hearts are not to be followed, that they are deceitfully wicked, that there is a right and a wrong way of living. And when we do what is right, it may be very difficult. It probably is going to be difficult, but it leads to life.
Yeah.
And so, by admitting that, by, again, they see it, right?
Yeah,
like,
they
it's not
pick
like you
up on
can
it for
hide
sure.
it from them. They live in
No.
your house. Like, you can maybe fool your friends.
Yeah, well, they're not
You're
there
not
with
going to
you.
fool your family.
Right,
Like,
'cause they're
there's
there.
no other. Exactly.
Yeah,
Like,
they see it.
They've seen
they
it
feel
all.
it, all of it. Yeah. So some lessons learned here. How I how I raise my children is hard. It's hard, okay? And I don't have it all figured out, but the one thing that I do is that I'm consistent with my kids. I'm consistent with how I speak to them. I'm consistent about how they speak to their mom and speak to me. I'm consistent about how they speak to others that are outside this family. I am consistent about praying at dinner time. I'm consistent about praying before bedtime. That is how I know, and I don't have it all figured out, but that is my one way to be a better dad, is to be consistent.
Yeah, and consistency in my mind runs congruent with faithfulness. That's what
Yeah.
that is. Like, you've made a choice and you're going to stick with it,
Yep.
whatever that looks like. I think for me, in some ways, I suffered from lack of consistency with consequences. And so because there was either a rescuing or a desire to not see our kids suffer, they need to suffer from the choices that they make.
Yeah.
Because that's how you learn.
Yeah, that's right.
If the consequences are removed, then
You'll
you can just
continue it.
act however you want to act,
Yeah.
and there's nothing to be done with that. That's why,
Right.
in our society we have laws. Well, if there's not an actual way in which we should live that is right, I'm talking about ethics, and it just goes to statistical morality,
Yep.
where you have now 51% of the people say it's okay to get rid of individual property ownership rights. Like, and they can just vote, and now nobody owns anything anymore.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
and that's just one example of things, but like many other immoral, if you will, that are ethically wrong, but yet in our culture, because just the majority of people think it's good,
Legal.
like, we have to have a foundation,
Yeah.
a cornerstone, if you will, that, and something that's always there
Yeah.
and faithful
Yep.
and consistent,
Yeah.
because our world is that way.
And for me as a dad and as a man, I read my Bible every day before I do anything else. I get up. That's my foundation, because without that, I would just be living for the flesh, man. And I've done that, and it's not good. But for our kids, everything that we do is a learned trait. So it's our job to be able to pass off those good habit patterns, because once they deviate, they will come back,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, the Bible makes, I don't necessarily want to say it's a promise, but it is a pattern which you can recognize. You train up your child in the way that they should go, and they will not depart from it.
Right.
They may end up trying on their own, like I did. I thought I knew what was best for me.
Yeah.
I went down that path, and I realized, like, they need stability.
Yeah.
Our world is so, I mean, we're wearing like meat suits.
I
Like,
know,
dude,
man.
We can die in like 10 seconds,
Yeah.
right? Like, I get back in my
Fragile.
car when I leave here, right? Like,
Fragile.
anything that we can do. This is why treating their mother well, like
Yep.
making that promise to, no matter how bad, even if both of us have those bad days
Yeah.
together, we remain committed to each other.
That's right.
And that is, I think, a thing that will set them up for success in the future.
Yeah.
Seeing good examples in us.
Yeah. Everything's a learned trait. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you for sharing your side. And there's a lot of things that people don't talk about. For us, we have a solid foundation, and without it, we'd be living for our own will, and that doesn't work. Trust me, because I've been there. So if you like this podcast, it's made available at reallifeschool.com. Please like it, share it, follow, subscribe, and comment below. And we look forward to seeing you guys out there. And if you guys have any other questions, comments, or concerns, please reach out, and we can do another podcast and address any other topics or things that people don't like to talk about. We'll talk about it. So
For sure.
thanks, guys. Have a good one. Bye.